California's reparations plan is based on a flawed and divisive notion of racial justice that ignores the complexity and diversity of the state's history and population. The plan, which estimates that $569 billion is owed to black residents for slavery and other injustices, is not only unrealistic and unaffordable, but also unfair and discriminatory. First, the plan fails to acknowledge that California was never a slave state and that slavery was outlawed by its first constitution in 1849. While slavery did exist in California before it became a state, it was mostly practiced by Native Americans who enslaved other Native Americans or Mexicans. Moreover, the majority of black Californians today are not descendants of enslaved people who lived in the state, but rather immigrants or migrants from other parts of the country or the world. Therefore, the plan's criteria for eligibility, which requires that one must be a descendant of an enslaved African American or a free black person living in the U.S. before the end of the 19th century, is arbitrary and exclusionary. Second, the plan disregards the fact that black Californians are not a monolithic group and that they have different experiences and perspectives on reparations. Some black Californians may not support reparations at all, while others may prefer different forms of compensation than cash payments. For instance, some may favor investments in education, health care, and homeownership for black communities, while others may advocate for broader social and economic reforms that benefit all marginalized groups. The plan also ignores the potential negative consequences of reparations, such as creating resentment and division among racial groups, stigmatizing black people as victims, and undermining personal responsibility and agency. Third, the plan overlooks the reality that California is facing a severe fiscal crisis and that reparations are not a priority for most Californians. The state has a budget deficit of roughly $25 billion this year and is struggling to provide basic services and infrastructure to its residents. The state also has the highest poverty rate and income inequality in the nation, affecting people of all races and backgrounds. The plan's proposal to tax the rich to fund reparations is unrealistic and counterproductive, as it would drive away more businesses and taxpayers from the state. Moreover, the plan does not have widespread public support, as polls show that more than two-thirds of Americans oppose reparations. In conclusion, California's reparations plan is based on a flawed and divisive notion of racial justice that does not reflect the state's history or its current challenges. The plan is not only unfeasible and costly, but also unjust and divisive. Instead of pursuing reparations, California should focus on addressing its fiscal problems and improving its social and economic conditions for all its residents. California's reparations plan could create resentment, conflict, and violence among different groups of people by imposing a huge financial burden on the state, creating racial preferences in housing and education, and dividing the society along racial lines. One of the main problems with the reparations plan is that it would cost the state an estimated $800 billion, which is more than the state's annual budget. The plan would require each black resident to receive $1.2 million as compensation for slavery and other injustices. However, the state is already facing a $728 million budget shortfall over the next 2 fiscal years, and has seen a large exodus of high-income earners who contribute to the tax revenue. The reparations plan would therefore require either massive tax increases or drastic cuts in public services, which would hurt all Californians regardless of their race. Another problem with the reparations plan is that it would create racial preferences in renting and buying properties, as well as in accessing public colleges and universities. The task force recommends that black people should be given priority in renting and buying in areas that have been historically segregated, and that public colleges and universities should be free for anyone eligible for reparations. These proposals would violate the principle of equal opportunity and merit, and would disadvantage other groups of people who may also face discrimination or hardship. Moreover, these proposals would increase racial tensions and animosity, as some people may feel that they are being unfairly excluded or discriminated against based on their race. A third problem with the reparations plan is that it would divide the society along racial lines, instead of promoting unity and healing. The task force proposes to use a broad definition of eligibility for reparations, which would include not only descendants of enslaved people, but also anyone who identifies as Black or African American. This would raise questions about who qualifies as Black or African American, and how to verify their identity and ancestry. Furthermore, the task force suggests that reparations should be paid not only for slavery, but also for other forms of discrimination and oppression that have occurred throughout history. This would open a Pandora's box of grievances and claims, as different groups of people may demand reparations for various historical wrongs. This would undermine the sense of common identity and shared destiny that is essential for a cohesive and harmonious society. In conclusion, California's reparations plan could create resentment, conflict, and violence among different groups of people by imposing a huge financial burden on the state, creating racial preferences in housing and education, and dividing the society along racial lines. The plan is not only unrealistic and unfeasible, but also unjust and divisive. Instead of pursuing reparations, California should focus on addressing the root causes of racial disparities and inequalities, such as poverty, education, health care, criminal justice reform, and economic opportunity. These are the issues that affect all Californians, regardless of their race, and that require collective action and solidarity. California's reparations plan could undermine the principles of individual responsibility, merit, and equality by creating a system of racial preferences and entitlements that would reward people based on their ancestry rather than their achievements. The plan would require the state to apologize for slavery and racism, and to pay cash payments to eligible Black residents who can prove they are descendants of enslaved people or free Black people living in the U.S. before the end of the 19th century. The task force that proposed the plan also suggested giving Black people priority in renting and buying property, and vetoing local real estate decisions that could lead to segregation. Such a plan would violate the principle of individual responsibility by holding current generations accountable for the sins of their ancestors, and by implying that Black people are helpless victims who need government handouts to succeed. It would also ignore the diversity and complexity of Black experiences in California, where some Black people have thrived despite historical discrimination, while others have faced challenges unrelated to slavery or racism. The plan would also violate the principle of merit by rewarding people based on their skin color rather than their skills, talents, or contributions. It would create a sense of entitlement and dependency among Black people, and a sense of resentment and guilt among other groups. It would also discourage personal effort and excellence by sending the message that success is determined by race rather than by hard work and innovation. Finally, the plan would violate the principle of equality by creating a racial hierarchy that would favor one group over others based on historical grievances. It would divide Californians along racial lines and fuel racial tensions and conflicts. It would also undermine the common identity and values that unite Americans as citizens of a free and democratic nation. California's reparations plan could hurt humanity and pierce the social fabric by eroding the principles of individual responsibility, merit, and equality that are essential for a fair and prosperous society. Instead of pursuing such a divisive and costly plan, California should focus on addressing the root causes of racial disparities and promoting equal opportunity and justice for all.